Our story begins with the heroes fighting against the dragon. The man called the dragon Genelosar to warn it to prepare itself because he would end that attack on the Howard Empire today. However, Genelosar dismissed them as insects and declared that they never tire of crawling out. Genelosar also shouted at them, proclaiming that half an empire was too low compensation for his dead child and vowed to tear them limb from limb and crush the other half of the empire. This scene unfolds in a webtoon titled Chronicles of a Dragon, Episode 7, which our protagonist was reading. Our protagonist, who was engrossed in the webtoon, was skinny and in the hospital. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease, causes the motor nerve cells to gradually die, leading to muscle paralysis throughout the body and, eventually, death. Diagnosed with it at age 25, it was a death sentence. At such a young age, with no family, the money he had saved, and a body that still had so much to offer were all destroyed by a single disease. 4 years after being diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, at the age of 29, all he had left was his skinny body and that amateur webtoon. It was literally all he had left. While he was engrossed in reading, his heartbeat was normal, but then it slowly flatlined. He heard it and thought that this was the end. His eyes slowly closed, and through blurred vision, he saw the doctor rushing toward him. But he just thought that, after all, he wouldn't be able to see the end of the webtoon he was reading. Then, his heartbeat stopped, but then it slowly resumed and he came back to life. Suddenly, he saw a bright light and, when he opened his eyes, he saw someone in front of him. The man excitedly looked at him, causing confusion. Then the man lifted him up, which allowed him to see himself in the mirror and wonder what the hell was going on. He was horrified when he realized that he had become a dragon and shouted in horror. At first, he thought he was going to faint. He went through denial of reality, and after coming to terms with it, he tried to figure out what was happening. Once he accepted the reality, he realized that he had reincarnated as a dragon. He remembered that in all the novels and webtoons he had read, there was never a weak dragon. So, he thought he couldn't complain about being reincarnated as a dragon because he became the strongest being in the world. Most importantly, while a cat only lived 10 years, a human 80 years, a dwarf 250 years, an elf 1,000 years, and a fairy 3,000 years, the average lifespan of a dragon is 10,000 years. In his previous life, he had to work from a young age, then got sick and died in his prime years. But now, he thinks life is different and that being reincarnated as a dragon with a long and healthy life is the ultimate gift. He happily cheered for himself and shyly wondered why he was feeling so excited, thinking that with this new form, he could overcome any obstacle in his way. He proudly declared himself a dragon when someone approached behind him and lifted him up, calling him Lois. The person then asked why he was so excited and suggested they go eat. As they approached the dining table, the man put a cute bib on him. However, he could only stare at the food in horror, noticing its unappetizing and moving appearance. The man inquired if something was wrong and if he wasn't hungry, then mentioned that the food was best when fresh, so he should eat. Reluctantly reaching for it, he thought he would never get used to this but remembered the saying, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." As a dragon, he needed to follow dragon laws. To his surprise, the food tasted like strawberries. He happily dug in, but then noticed the man in front of him brimming with joy and asking if he liked it, encouraging him to eat up because there was more. He told the man that his eyes were very expressive and called him his father, expressing his reluctance to eat any more, which saddened the man. The man tearfully asked what was wrong and reminded him to call him dad, not father, and sweetly tried to coax him into saying dad. He just looked at his father, thinking to himself that he was, indeed, a damn dragon. Then, realizing he didn't even know his father's name, he asked what his dad's name was. His father, surprised he had only now thought to ask after a month, replied that his name was Genelosar. He stopped in horror upon hearing the name, connecting it to the formidable dragon from the webtoon he had been reading. Shocked and panicky, he stumbled down from his chair. Genelosar called out his name in confusion, but he could only walk backward, shaking. Then, he ran away, crying and shouting that it couldn't be true, leaving Genelosar in shock. He ran swiftly, unable to believe what he had just heard. Opening a door, he found himself inside a library. Grabbing a book from the shelf, he began flipping through it, only to stop on a page in horror. He saw the Howard Empire mentioned, recalling it was the name of an empire from an amateur webtoon he had read before his death. After reading the book, he realized he hadn't been reincarnated as a dragon by chance but had become entwined with the webtoon's narrative. Genelosar then called out to him, asking worriedly if he was hurt. Realizing Genelosar's gentle and caring nature, he wondered if he would become a genocider. He remembered Genelosar's line from the webtoon about not being able to live peacefully again due to their arrogance and his vow to dye the entire continent with blood. This made him recall that Genelosar went insane after his hatchling was killed by humans. Then, he asked Genelosar if he had an older brother. While attempting to feed him fruit, Genelosar replied that he was the oldest. Panicking, he asked Genelosar if he planned to have more children. Genelloser responded with a no, explaining that he had promised his mother they would have only one child and raise it well. Dizzy with this revelation, he realized that if there were none before and there would be none after him, then he must be the hatchling that dies. He remembered that in the webtoon, Genelloser loses his child and goes insane, attacking the Empire. Collapsing to the ground in shock, Genelloser rushed to help him. But his mind was occupied with the thought that he was merely a trigger for the story to begin. He was the child of a villainous dragon who would perish before the story even unfolded. Tearfully, he realized he had become a dragon fated to die, a terminally ill dragon. Later, he was in the room, lying amidst jewels, gold, and other valuables, feeling depressed. He couldn't believe that, like in his previous life, he was still terminally ill and wouldn't even get to spend all that money. He asked himself if he was dying again, if it was all for nothing. But then he furiously shouted no. He couldn't die like this. The next morning, he reached for the book, grabbed it, and started reading. He knew that he had to remember the year Genelloser went into berserker mode, because if he could find out the year Genelloser went berserk, he could determine when he was scheduled to die. After trying to recall, he eventually remembered it was in 3589 AC. Relieved that he remembered, he began to write. He thought that since it was currently 3090 AC, it would be between the ages of 498 and 499, so he figured out it was 1 year before he reached adulthood, and he was going to die as a child. He crumpled the paper, refusing to accept his fate, and swore that for the next 499 years, he must survive. He wouldn't back down, he would conquer life itself. Later, at the dining table, someone could be heard eating rapidly. It was him, devouring the food in an instant, leaving his father stunned in shock. He told Genelloser that he wanted another bowl, and Genelloser immediately agreed, handing him a full bowl of food and telling him there was plenty, so he should eat as much as he wanted. While he was busy eating, a fly appeared above them and flew down to his spoon. Just as he was about to put the spoon in his mouth, Genelloser shouted, calling his name and slapping the spoon away from his hand. He angrily asked Genelloser what was going on, and Genelloser, worried, explained that he almost got himself into trouble. Then Genelloser showed him the fly, explaining it was an artificial creature his father was researching. It wasn't dangerous to dragons like them, but since he was young, it might be dangerous because it was highly poisonous, which shocked him in horror. Stunned in fear, while Genelloser laughingly assured him that since he hadn't eaten it, he must be okay. Genelloser, looking at the fly, wondered if it had escaped the lab, while he realized in horror that it was close and decided he needed to start paying more attention. A moment later, he walked to the red carpet surrounded by robot knights, happily reading when one of the robots glared at him and moved to attack from behind. Sensing a presence behind him, he stopped walking and looked back. But he shouted in fear when he saw a blade launching at him. Fortunately, Genelloser arrived in time, pushed him away, grabbed the sharp blade, stared at the robot with his eyes, and released a violet, powerful energy that caused the robot to explode into pieces. Genelloser asked if he was okay and thought it was strange because he was sure he had set it up so it wouldn't harm him, but he was stunned in disbelief that he had almost died twice just now. A few days later, there were no more suspicions. Instead, he was convinced. Emerging from their mansion alongside Genelloser, he was delighted to witness the vast beauty of the land. He was astonished by the size of the place. Genelloser pointed towards something and explained that it was the left fang of the earth, one of two gigantic mountains at the continent's edge, renowned for being the abode of many mysterious races. Upon hearing this, he speculated that it might be larger than Mount Everest, observing that it differed significantly from what he had seen in books. Then, a butterfly caught his eye, and he chased after it, exclaiming its beauty. Suddenly, the clouds darkened, and a rumbling sound emanated from them. A bolt of lightning then struck him, leaving him burnt and confused. Genelloser rushed to his side in concern, but another thunderbolt hit him, making him realize the gravity of the situation. When the clouds rumbled again and he was struck by lightning for the third time, he wondered if the script intended for his demise. Genelloser, in tears, shouted his name while holding him, now unconscious. The next day, he lay in bed, weeping, shaken by the thought that he had nearly died. He couldn't fathom the odds of being struck by lightning thrice in the same spot in such a brief span. He pondered over the script's apparent desire for his death, considering why it sought his end when it was still 498 years away, and he was destined to die at the hands of humans. Frustrated, he questioned whether the narrative truly began only with his death. Reflecting on how the webtoon's baby dragon survived 500 years, he touched his forehead, overwhelmed by the complexity. While pondering, he suddenly sprang from his bed, realizing there was no time to waste. He needed to act to save himself from the death mark. He dashed to the room, flung open the door, and called out to his father. Genelloser greeted him warmly, inquiring about the matter. He asked Genelloser if they had any protective equipment at home. Genelloser confirmed they did, but noted it was too soon for him to use them. To wield such equipment, one needed something called attribute power, which required extensive training. Geneloser then patted his head, reassuring him that there was plenty of time to learn, given he was still young and had hundreds of years ahead. However, he insisted on learning now, leaving Geneloser surprised and puzzled. Geneloser tried to tell him that he was still too young, but he sweetly asked his father if he couldn't learn because he was little, using his puppy eyes. Geneloser tells him that usually, one learns after passing the stage of infancy. Still, using his brightly cute eyes, he managed to make his father agree, and Geneloser, defeatedly, agreed to teach him. Excitedly, he shouted that they should start right now, but Geneloser told him that before they started, there was a place they needed to visit first. He asked him where, and Geneloser, raising his finger, tells him that for a child of the dragon race to discover his own attributes for the first time, he must seek the elders. However, he just looks at Geneloser, confused. Later, he happily came out of the mansion, excitedly calling his father, whom Geneloser received sweetly. He asks how they get to the elder's place. Geneloser released his power, telling him that to get there, they must fly. He covers his face while his father releases a strong power, and peeks to see the strong purple power wrapped around his father. He realizes that it is a dragon transformation, and a moment later, he sees his father change into a huge purple dragon. Amazed, he couldn't believe that it was a real dragon. Geneloser opens his palm and tells him to climb up. He climbs into Geneloser's claw, and Geneloser begins to fly into the sky, telling him to hold tight. As Geneloser flies up, he tries to shout that it is so high, but only mumbling words came out from his mouth. A moment later, as Geneloser is still flying upward, he asks how high they are going. Geneloser, laughingly, replied that they were still a long way off. Then, they pass the clouds. He wonders if they are going to soar through the atmosphere and into space, but then Geneloser tells him that they are almost there, and he sees a bright land floating above them. Shocked, he sees it, and Geneloser explains to him that it is the sacred land of use, the dragons, and it's called Silver Flower Castle. They then arrived at the castle, and he was amazed to see that it was even bigger when they were close. Geneloser turns back into his human form and tells him that they should go in. They walk inside and head to the center where the dragons are gathered. Sandra, the leader of the 13 dragon elders, tells them that they are there. Geneloser gracefully greeted them and introduced himself as Geneloser, the son of Pamis, but he just stutteringly said hello to them. Bardus, one of the elders, asks Geneloser if this is his child and tells him that his child looks very smart and gentle for the grandson of Pamis, which makes Pamis call Bardus a bastard. Then Geneloser greeted his father Pamis, and Pamis, one of the 13 elders, tells Geneloser that it's been 623 years, and the last time he came was to introduce his wife, Valentina. Then Pamis angrily tells Geneloser that he should have shown his grandson as soon as he was born and asks why he has to meet his grandson for the first time along with the other old folks. Geneloser explains that Lois was born just a month ago and asks Pamis if he wants to force Lois to come there. Pamis looked away in anger but then turned his gaze to him, who was looking back. He stared at Pamis in amazement. They stared at each other for a moment, and then he sweetly called Pamis grandpa, which made Pamis's blush. Then, laughing, Pamis told him that he was his grandfather and what a fine-looking child he had for a grandson. The other dragons noticed that Pamis absolutely adored his first grandson, and acknowledged that Pamis had been longing for a grandson for so long, they suggested letting Pamis enjoy the moment. Sandra asked Geneloser if he wanted to know Lois's attribute and if it wasn't a bit too early. Geneloser replied that he had thought the same, but Lois had expressed his wish to learn. Pamis proudly shouted that Lois was a passionate learner, just like his grandfather, making Sandra annoyed and telling Pamis to be quiet. Sandra sighed, knowing that Pamis never stopped, and ordered Lois to step into the center. He worriedly looked at his father, but Geneloser assured him that it was nothing serious and all he needed to do was just stay still. So, he walked into the center and stayed still as Geneloser had told him to do. Sandra announced that they should begin, and they all released something in their palms together. Then, a different color of light emerged in front of him, leaving him amazed. Sandra ordered him to close his eyes and chant to his lifelong companion. He followed Sandra's instructions and chanted for his lifelong companion to come forth. Then, a bright light emanated from him. Sandra was shocked to see his attribute, and Geneloser was astounded to discover that it was an abstract attribute, which meant time. Geneloser became excited, knowing that abstract attributes are usually stronger than natural attributes, and thought that his son was a genius. In Pamis's hand, his attribute was strength, making Pamis proudly proclaim that it was true to his lineage and that he had dual attributes. Suddenly, another attribute appeared in Bardus's hand. Sandra shouted in shock that there was a space attribute as well, which meant there were 3 attributes. They all knew that the first dragon king, Kitus, and the worst dragon ever, swallowed by the evil Rotvarir, were the only 2 dragons in the dragon tribe's long history who had triple attributes. But then, another attribute appeared in the white dragon, who stutteringly asked if Lois also had a mental attribute. Then, attributes descended upon him, causing a bright light that made Geneloser cover his eyes. They all saw him surrounded by 4 attributes and happily jumping around. He praised his attributes, but he looked back when he felt someone's presence and saw the elder dragon staring at him. Fearfully, he asked why they looked at him like that, while his father, on the side, was shocked as well. Later, they returned to their mansion, and he sat in a chair, contemplating his 4 abstract attributes. He recognized this as a talent that left even the dragon speechless, with potential vast enough to disrupt the balance of the original plot. He pondered whether he could manage all the forthcoming events in the story with such an extraordinary ability. He speculated that the story's flow might have been altered because of his abilities, possibly frustrating those who wished to harm him. However, he sighed, wondering what the use of having the greatest talent was if there was a chance he might die before reaching maturity. For a moment, he felt depressed thinking about his potential demise, but then confidence surged within him, acknowledging that while his talent brought crises, it also presented an opportunity. Grabbing a book, he thought that honing his talent would significantly increase his chances of survival. Most importantly, he was not the Lois from the original story. He had memories of his previous life and was aware of the impending crisis. Determined to utilize this knowledge to ensure his survival, he contemplated whether to master the magic skills that manipulate attributes or the martial arts that handle attributes and the body simultaneously. He wondered whether he should master one first for his survival or learn both simultaneously. Confidently, he considered that his body, being that of a dragon, blessed with abundant mana and born with 4 attributes, could achieve greatness with just a bit more effort. He then placed the books in front of him, ready to start immediately. Moments later, Geneloser appeared behind him with a large pot of food, asking if he had waited long enough. Presenting a huge bowl of food, Geneloser announced that it was time to eat. Seeing the food, he drooled and wondered if he should snack first, recalling the saying, "Even a journey to Kumgang Mountain starts with a meal." Then, he noticed the potions in his meal: the water attribute potion, resembling blue ice crystals, Lamus; the wood attribute potion, a kind of chewy stem; the wind attribute potion, sky jellyfish, fluffy as cotton candy; and the thunder attribute potions, heart of thunderbird, offering a fizzy sensation. He knew that although these potions contained energy that could cause ordinary beings to explode if consumed carelessly, dragons possess a permanent organ called the dragon heart, which can convert mana from nature into their own attributes, making such a feast possible. He started eating, knowing he needed to consume a lot and grow rapidly, but while eating, he dozed off, prompting Geneloser to laugh silently, thinking he must be very tired. While he was sleeping peacefully in his bed, a purple circle floated beside him. It slowly moved and transformed into a fork. Once fully formed, it forcefully fell and pierced the floor. Then, the purple power moved closer to him and disappeared. The next morning, he woke up, wondering when he had fallen asleep, remembering that he had just eaten a snack. Geneloser then told him it was time to get up and eat. He replied, yes, but as he was about to get down, something pulled him back, causing him to fall. Then he saw a sharp fork near his face, leaving him shocked. He grabbed the fork, wondering if he had almost died from a fork stuck in the floor, and couldn't believe that of all things, he would die from such a nonsensical death flag. Then he saw a string tied to his tail, making him wonder where the coherence went, and was shocked in horror when he saw it was coming from his bunny teddy bear named Toto. He sadly dragged Toto along while saying that Toto was the only one he could vent to and decided to ask his father to fix it. At the dining table, Geneloser was fixing Toto while he ate, telling him that he must have been sad when Toto broke. Geneloser assured him that he would fix Toto up nicely, but then his eyes slowly closed, and when he woke up in shock, he was in bed. He wondered when he had ended up there. Once again, he heard Geneloser say it was time to get up and eat. He was about to get down when he noticed Toto, fixed, next to him, making him wonder when it got fixed. Then he fearfully told his father that something seemed off. Geneloser, panicked and worried, asked him if he was hurt somewhere. He asked if it was pain or not and told his father that he was not sure, but his memory was spotty, and he kept feeling sleepy. Geneloser just looked at him smilingly, which made him confused. Then, Geneloser told him that he thought it was about time, and he asked what he meant. Geneloser replied that it was not pain because it was just his sleeping phases approaching. He explained to him that dragons have 2 sleeping phases for growth, and he was feeling sleepy often because his first sleeping phase was nearing. He asked Geneloser how long he would sleep, and Geneloser replied that there is no exact time. but roughly it could be 100 years. He was stunned in horror upon hearing this. He cursed, knowing that just a few days ago he had faced that absurd death flag, but now he had to sleep for 100 years, panicking at the thought that it was literally asking for him to be killed. He ran away, crying, and shouted that it couldn't continue, leaving Genaloser in shock. Then he tied a cloth around his head and opened the book with determination, thinking that he needed a plan to stay awake as much as possible. He planned to avoid eating because a full belly makes one sleepy, skip showers because they tend to relax him, minimize movement to avoid exhaustion, and not go near the bed because just seeing a bed makes him want to lie down. After writing his plan, he decided to stay awake as much as possible, but just a moment later, he felt drained from not having a meal, tired, and wanting to sleep. Suddenly, he heard someone rushing behind him, and when he looked back, it was Genaloser holding a spoonful of food, shouting at him that he needed nourishment. Genaloser tried to put the food in his mouth while telling him to eat just one spoonful, but he ran away, causing Genaloser to shout his name in frustration. Then he walked into the library, thinking that it was a close call, and he nearly ended up eating it. He looked at the book, knowing that he couldn't afford to let his guard down until he found a way to resist sleep. Then, he read in the book that he should stand, pinch his thighs, eat something spicy, splash his face with cold water, and avoid reading books to stay awake. But then, his eyes slowly closed. He slapped his face hard to stop himself, but the tiredness was crawling over his body. He slapped his face once more, but he couldn't resist the sleep anymore and blacked out. Later, Genaloser continuously called his name to wake him up, and he woke up in shock because of it. Genaloser asked him if he slept well, but he replied that he hadn't slept. He had just dozed off for a bit. Genaloser congratulated him, making him confused, and he asked his father what the celebration was for. Genaloser replied that they were celebrating his 100th birthday. 100 years ago, Genaloser entered his room while calling his name and telling him that he had brought a snack, but found Genaloser asleep amid the books. Realizing he had fallen asleep while reading that adorable book, he gently picked him up and laid him on his bed. Worried, Genaloser thought it would have been better if he had eaten more before sleeping. But since he was already asleep, he simply hoped he would wake up safely. Then, Genaloser patted his head, sweetly wishing him good night and promising to see him tomorrow. While Genaloser was peacefully working in his room, he heard something heavy fall, causing him to jump in shock. He rushed into Lois's room, asking what the hell was that, and was shocked to see Lois stuck in the bed. He immediately removed the wood and asked Lois, with concern, if he was okay and if he was hurt, but Lois just talked in his sleep peacefully. Looking around, he noticed no sign of a breach and couldn't believe that the legs made from noble periton wood had simply broken out of nowhere. He lifted Lois to take care of him, but in the decades that followed, a number of mysterious incidents continued to occur, as if someone was trying to kill Lois. He came close to dying many times. Genaloser didn't understand why these things kept happening to his son, so as a safety measure, he created safeguards in every possible way. Genaloser's lifespan had been shortened slightly, but it didn't matter to him as long as he could keep his son safe. For the past 60 years, Genaloser hadn't had a single good night's sleep, and with 4120 incidents threatening Lois's life, he wondered if someone was really trying to assassinate Lois and who could be behind it. Genaloser knew that the world had forgotten the dragons, and only a few xenomorphs were aware of their existence, making him wonder how any being could harm Lois without him realizing it. He also knew that only dragons would have that kind of power, but everyone living nearby protected their clan's hatchlings as if their lives depended on it, making him wonder if all those incidents were mere coincidences. In the peaceful mansion of Genaloser, a huge explosion occurred, sending a robot knight flying. Genaloser looked at them and angrily asked how those mindless creatures dared harm his son. The knights launched their attack on him, but with a mere raise of his hand, he unleashed his power around them. The dark power consumed the knights, and a purple light killed them instantly, but it didn't stop there, it slashed them into pieces. Genaloser then withdrew his power and stared at the pieces of knights on the floor. Then the scene shifts to Genaloser approaching his father, but Pamis simply told him that it couldn't be helped because geniuses always need to overcome numerous obstacles. Not only that, but many other trials and tribulations would befall Lois in the future, similar to what the first King Dragon experienced. Genaloser wondered if Lois's talent was so formidable that there were efforts to eliminate him. Clenching his hand, Genaloser thought that it couldn't be the case. Even if it were God, fate, or anything else, he would protect Lois from everything. Back in the present, Lois stared at himself in the mirror, examining his face. He wondered if he had grown a bit and angrily jumped around, shouting about having slept for 100 years, yet hardly growing at all. He then realized that he hadn't paid attention before, but now he recognized he had lost a significant part of his life. He pondered why he was still alive when he had been on the brink of death every day. Questioning if he had been safe while asleep, he was unsure of what to make of it. After a moment, he decided not to dwell on it anymore, thinking it didn't matter how it happened, what mattered was that he was alive. Geneloser then told him that it was almost dinner time and that he should get ready to eat and come downstairs, to which Lois replied affirmatively. Lois noticed the significant bags under Geneloser's eyes and wondered what was wrong with his father and if he was aging, making him surmise that he was indeed a tragedy. However, he proudly declared that he would be a good hatchling and listen to his father from now on. Sweetly, Lois told his father to wait for him, mentioning that he was hungry. He then inquired why his father looked so tired, but Geneloser simply asked back if he appeared tired. Lois affirmed and advised him to get some sleep before working again, to which Geneloser laughingly agreed. Years passed, and a little boy stood aside. The boy gazed at the tree before him, raised his wooden sword, and swung it down, causing the tree to vanish. Exhausted from his training, the boy heard someone call out, "Master, Master Lois." Then, unexpectedly, something inside the towel handed it to him. He grabbed the towel, revealing the small maid hidden within. The lady, shouting, told him she could see he had already adapted to his human form and that he indeed belonged to the holy and great dragon clan. However, he just stared at her, prompting her to inquire about his silence. He retorted that it had already been a staggering 100 years and, addressing her as Finn, asked if she could refrain from calling him her master. Finn, stuttering, affirmed that he was indeed her master and that honoring the superior dragons was a great privilege for them, the fairies. He glanced at the towel, realizing he hadn't considered the honor involved. He recalled that sometime after his first hibernation ended, he had turned around upon hearing a noise but saw nothing. Yet, he was certain he heard something and noticed the box on the table moving. Then, Finn emerged from the box, gasping for air, claiming there was no oxygen. Shocked by her appearance, he swung his tail to push her away, causing her to slam into the wall and fall to the ground, unconscious. Observing her, he questioned what this giant fly was, then picked her up with a pen, lifting her into the air. She awoke, startled to see him, and swiftly freed herself from the makeshift restraint. Gracefully, she introduced herself as Finn, royalty of the Starlight Fairies, expressing her honor in bringing him pleasure in the future. However, he merely looked at her, leading her to request being put down, to which he complied. Once settled, he inquired about the kind of pleasure she referred to. She retrieved a cloth nearby and revealed it to him, then unveiled a collection of beautiful garments, explaining that the Starlight Fairies had meticulously prepared a Starlight Fairy disguise playset version 23. This set, embracing the genderless nature of the fairy family, included outfits for both men and women, demons, and celestial beings to suit any situation, boasting a wide variety of choices, including some limited edition sets. The highlight of this set was her, a noble Starlight Fairy with the perfect physique to complement any outfit. Realizing it was akin to a perfect dollhouse set, he asked if she implied he could use her as a living toy. She confirmed with a smile, stating that, as the holy, great, and wise baby dragon, he had understood correctly. However, he outright rejected the idea, throwing her away while exclaiming his disapproval. He questioned his father about why such a gift would be given to him, only to learn it was highly sought after by hatchlings. Despite the popularity, the notion of treating a living being as a doll unsettled him, prompting his decision to return the gift. Yet, Finn, with tears in her eyes, pleaded for him not to cast her aside, offering to do anything, even his laundry. Clinging to his tail, she begged him not to discard her, and in that moment, he realized that being a dragon's companion was a significant honor and a sure path to greatness, recalling that the first fairy king who unified the fairy clans had been the childhood companion of the first dragon king. After days of crying and pleading, Finn was accepted as a subordinate. Being 800 years old, she possessed more knowledge than he did and proved to be surprisingly helpful with the minor details. When he seemed lost in thought, she inquired about his contemplations, to which he replied it was nothing. He then mentioned that, having completed his exercises, he intended to return to his studies, a plan Finn supported. With her innate talent for spatial manipulation, Finn was like a personal storage system for him, effortlessly retrieving items from subspaces. She handed him a book, suggesting he study the advanced concepts of mana separation and manifestation, for which he expressed his gratitude. Finn then prepared a table with plates, tea, and food pulled from her space, making him realize the convenience of her abilities. As he settled down to study, he acknowledged the need to adjust to this new arrangement. Suddenly, the sky darkened with rumbling clouds. Closing his book, he noted the recurrence of this phenomenon after a few days. As lightning struck, Finn called out his name in concern, but he calmly captured the thunderbolt within the watch on his wrist. With a proud smile, he raised his watch, remarking on his numerous encounters with lightning. Finn exclaimed over the thunder elemental stone in his watch, explaining its principle. The purer and stronger the power, the more gently it flows. However, she noted it was a low-grade, unstable attribute stone that, upon absorbing more lightning, risked becoming saturated. Observing the thunder elemental stone was full and required changing, another bolt of lightning descended, prompting Finn to panic and rush to his side. He looked up, momentarily startled, but managed to deflect it with his power. Finn was astounded by his ability to create a spatial distortion field, recognizing it as an advanced technique nearing Tier 1 magic. Excited by the potential for their combined efforts to forge a significant chapter in Fairy Clan history, she began to speculate on their future accomplishments, making him aware of her ambitious plans. Relieved by his recent focus on spatial shields, he contemplated how such knowledge could avert life-threatening incidents. His spatial abilities were nearing Tier 1, while his space and time attributes were at Tier 3, but his mind attribute lagged at Tier 5. Realizing his survival-focused approach had inadvertently neglected his other attributes, he saw a path to improvement and vowed to persevere. Determined to continue his development, he requested the next book from Finn, who eagerly complied. Later, at the dining table, he asks his father where he is going. Geneloser sadly replies that he is going to Silver Flower Castle because Kurdesher is retiring that month. He asks Geneloser if Kurdesher isn't his grandfather, and Geneloser replies that while Kurdesher is retiring, he thinks the grandfather is still a bit too involved. He tells Geneloser that his grandfather's friends are like grandfathers to him too, to which Geneloser thinks he will always do as he pleases. He tells Geneloser that he understands his grandfather is retiring, but he wonders why he needs to go there. Geneloser replied that he was assigned to Elder Kurdasher's position. Amazed, he proudly tells his father that he is so powerful, and Geneloser replied that if he says so, then it must be true. He knows that he is not the only one who has grown over the years. His father, who had been top tier for a long time, finally achieved Tier 0 in dark attributes. Even the average dragon can't do it, but his father reached it at the age of 4,000, a young age for a dragon, which is enough to make Geneloser the final boss. He remembers that in the original story, Geneloser, the berserker who ravaged the continent, had two main attributes, dark and magic. With those two attributes, Geneloser's entire body was dyed black, and he was known to be the second coming of the devil. But he thinks it won't happen this time because he has been training hard for the last 150 years to prevent it. Then, Geneloser hesitantly called him and tried to say something. He sighingly asked Geneloser what it was, and Geneloser replied that he didn't think he was going to be home for a while, which shocked him. Then Geneloser explained that normally, parents of hatchlings aren't chosen for this duty, but this time, there is no one else capable enough for the position. However, the succession process is normally very long, but it'll only be 10 years this time. He sadly asked his father if it was going to be 10 full years, and Geneloser, approaching him sadly, was told with a smile that it would pass quickly, leaving Geneloser shocked. Then he tells Geneloser that he thought it was going to take another couple of 100 years, but 10 years is only a decade, and he has recently started studying lawlessness theory, so he'll speed it up. But he stops when he sees his father sulking on the side. He asks Geneloser if he expects him to cry and begs him not to go. Geneloser tearfully replies that he doesn't know what to expect. Then Geneloser asks him if there is anything he wants to eat and tells him to give him a second because he'll get him some more snacks. He sighed and told his father that he was not a child anymore. The next day, outside the mansion, Geneloser tells him that the nutritional pills are in the freezer, so he shouldn't skip meals just to practice. He adds that the emergency first aid kit is in the third drawer of his room, so if he gets sick, he should find it and use it. As Geneloser is about to say more, he interrupts, shouting that he'd be okay and that Geneloser should just leave already because he had been repeating the same advice for an hour. He angrily tells Geneloser that he is not a kid anymore and that he'll only be alone for 10 years. Geneloser then gives him something and explains that it is a natural object called a communication stone. They come in pairs and, when energized, can communicate over long distances. He looks at the communication stones, thinking they look quite expensive. He asks his father if they'll be able to communicate even though he'll be at Silver Flower Castle. Geneloser is stunned for a moment and sadly realizes that the stone's range doesn't extend that far, making him think this is something even the smartest people overlook. He puts the communication stone in his pocket while telling Geneloser that he always said, "No news is good news," so he shouldn't worry about him and should focus on his projects, which Geneloser stutteringly agrees to. Geneloser then opens his wings and says he guesses it's time to leave and that if he needs anything, he should look in his room. Then, as Geneloser flies away, he shouts that he can also read his books if he gets bored, and reminds him not to skip meals and to eat well. Geneloser also shouts that it's dangerous outside the city, so he shouldn't leave, making him think that his father is overprotective, but understandingly so, since Geneloser has protected him from many threats over the past 100 or so years. He then smiles, realizing he'll be on his own for a while. He jumps in happiness and runs to his mansion, shouting that it's his mansion now. However, later, he is seated in horror as Finn cries and begs him for help. Then, two people approach Finn, laughing and reaching for her as she tells them not to come any closer. They just grab her and laugh creepily, making Finn beg him to save her. He rescues Finn from the two individuals and angrily confronts them about their presence. The twins, relieved, rush towards him. Both speak at once, overwhelming him, and he requests they speak one at a time for clarity. Kenny, the elder twin, informs him that their father has departed for Silver Flower Castle, leaving them to their own devices. Kon, the younger, adds that Geneloser mentioned he would return in 10 years, suggesting they are as concerned as he is. Kenny explains they visited to alleviate any boredom he might be experiencing, a notion that irritates him, though he maintains composure, suggesting perhaps too bluntly they should leave. Kon's loud objection questions his hostility, while Kenny hints at an unspoken boundary he's crossed. He reflects on the twins, who reside on a neighboring peak as fraternal twin dragons born a millennium apart. Their introduction by his father was meant to console him over his lack of growth, finding their youthful appearance and playful nature initially endearing. However, their unsolicited visits soon became a nuisance, disrupting his solitude. Frustrated by their interruption, he questions the wisdom behind his father's decision to introduce them. The twins, undeterred by his irritation, insist their visit was to provide companionship, believing he would appreciate the gesture. Kon, attempting to lighten the mood, reveals a sword, suggesting it as a form of entertainment. Surprised by the weapon, he quickly confiscates it, examining its craftsmanship and the enigmatic lightning crystal embedded within. Curious, he inquires about its origin, but the twins only offer puzzled looks, equally captivated by the sword's unique feature. Kon replied that he got it from his father's storage room. Then, Kenny takes out two swords, happily telling him that they took them from their father's storage. He asks if they got permission from Uncle Carlos, who is the twins' father, but the twins just look away, making him realize that they sneaked in. He knows that the sword is a magic sword with a spatial attribute stone and it contains much more power than he possesses. Then, he noticed that the crystal lit up, and he wondered if the line on it was a magic circle. He thinks that it seems to do something and asks Finn what she thinks. She replied that she thinks it was broken and had lost its function. She then tells him that she didn't know exactly and it was a very high-level spell, but she had seen many subspace swords and staffs like it. Still, the circle is very complex, so the size of the subspace must be very large. He smiled upon hearing this and shouted that he'd test it out himself. He thinks since that sword came from a dragon's treasure trove, Carlos must have hidden something great in the subspace, and he decided to claim all of it. A few hours later, he was busy fixing the sword while the twins were lying in front of him. Kenny tells him that she is bored, and Kon asks him when it will be over. Suddenly, he shouts, making the twins look at him excitedly, and he proudly tells them that he has fixed it, making the twins excited and telling him to test it. He tells them to hold up because he was going to push the elemental power first and begins to push it with his power, but he realizes that it is a lot more energy than he thought and wonders what the hell is being kept there. Suddenly, the stone released a circle that became bigger and bigger. He covered his face, asking what it was and if it wasn't the subspace. The circle began to consume the air around them, making him panic. But then a bright light came out from the circle and consumed them. In the ice cave, the circle appeared and transported them. He opened his eyes in confusion and was shocked to see that they were floating. Then, they all fell and slammed into the ice hard. Finn worriedly asks them if they are okay, and Kon replied that he thinks his ass is split while he was shaking on the ground, face first. He stands up, asking where they are, and looks around. He notices that they are in the cave, and suddenly, the stone and the sword lights up and explodes into pieces. They are all stunned to see it, and Kon cries and shouts that he has broken his sword. He panically tells Kon that it was not a sword, it was an attribute stone. But Kon just cried hard and shouted that he had broken his attribute stone. He asks Kenny if she knows to whom the sword belonged, and she replies that she heard it belonged to her great-grandmother. He inquires whether her great-grandmother was a spatial mage, but she admits that she doesn't know much more than that. Realizing he was at an impasse, he knows he needs to at least understand its purpose, so he can use it as well. Finn then calls him over to show him something. They walk to where Finn is calling from and see a sword pierced into the ground at the center. He looks at the broken sword, questioning what it was, and figures out that the sword was not a subspace treasure trove, but an interdimensional gate connecting two different places. Cursing, he realizes that his greed for treasure blinded him and that he should have been more cautious. He starts walking, prompting Kenny to ask where he is going. He replies that he needs to find out where they are so they can get home. Then, he tells them to come with him, which the twins follow. A moment later, they arrive at the end of the cave and stop upon seeing that it is blocked with ice. Gathering his power in his hands, he proudly tells them he'll get them out and throws it, hitting the ice blocking the way. The ice shatters into pieces, and they are surprised as the bright light hits their faces. Then, he notices that snow has entered the cave from the outside, while the twins are amazed. He climbs the ice to see the outside and is stunned by the sight, prompting Khan to ask what is wrong and what is going on. Finn flies next to him to check, asking him what the hell happened. He is shocked to realize they are in the right fang. Khan panics and asks what the right fang is. Canny suggests that she thinks Lois meant the left fang, but Finn explains to them that the Earth's right fang is a mountain located at the easternmost point of the winter continent, and the mountain near their house is called the left fang, while the right fang is on the opposite end of the world. He is stunned in horror, realizing this means they are in deep trouble, and they begin to walk out of the cave. This world is called Evan. It is divided into 4 continents, each boasting a consistent climate throughout the year: the spring continent, with its mild weather year-round; the summer continent, featuring a tropical-like climate and scorching sun; the autumn continent, known for its cooler climate and abundant sunshine, which has experienced bountiful harvests for hundreds of years; and finally, the winter continent, characterized by its cold, harsh climate with bitter winds and snow. The Genelosers' home, the Nokchai mountain range, is located at the westernmost tip of the spring continent, and they are now at the exact opposite end of the winter continent, near the Earth's right fang, located at the eastern tip. Then, he smiled and laughed heartily while crying, making the twins wonder what was wrong with him. He scratches his head, thinking that the reincarnation ordeal was bearable, but he wonders if he will be able to overcome it. He shook in fear, knowing that he was constantly threatened and that the outside world was full of danger. Also, he didn't mean to stray from his house, but then he snapped and wondered what would happen if someone discovered that he had disappeared from the castle. Then, he fears the Geneloser might turn into a berserker. Then, he remembered that he had a communication stone. So, he pulled it out of his pocket and was glad that he brought it. But he was down in the snow, guessing that they couldn't reach space after all, making the twins ask him worriedly what he was doing. He asks Finn if it was possible to cross the East Sea, and she replied, shouting that it was not possible. She then tells them that it was a demonic sea, a trace left behind by the worst of the evil dragons. It is the sea that separates the winter continent from the spring continent, where all sorts of demons lurk, and even adult dragons stay away from. She then tells him that even if he is chosen by the 4 elements, at his age, it would be impossible to cross that sea. He tells her that she is right and he is just asking. He then asks her how long it would take them to cross the continent and reach the left fang. She replies that she doesn't know exactly, but if they go walking, she guesses they would arrive at the left fang in about 10 years. He thinks if he hurries, he might be able to make it back before his father returns and shouts to the twins to listen to him. He then shouts to them that they are in great trouble and explains that they are in the right fang, located at the end of the winter continent, and it would take them 10 years on foot to get home. Canny asks him if they will go flying, but he angrily asks her back if she really wants to get kidnapped, making her confused. He then tells them that they should forget it because they can't fly and they'll walk like humans and arrive in 10 years. Khan raises his hand and asks him what if they don't make it back in 10 years. He replied that his father would be back in 10 years, and if they were not there, the twins, stuttering, asked him, what then? He replies that they'll set the whole continent on fire looking for them. But the twins just looked at him in silence. Canny asks why they would do that, making him realize that those bastards aren't human. So, he tells them that they are going to beat the crap out of them, and maybe they won't buy them snacks or a toy for 100 years, making the twins shocked in horror. Then, the twins begin to panic upon hearing this, making him realize that their snacks and toys are more precious than the well-being of the continent. He then tells them that they just need to get home before their fathers are back, and he is in charge from now on, so they should listen to him. But the twins disagree because they want to be in charge too. He proudly tells them that leadership is for the smartest dragons and asks if they are smarter than him. However, the twins remind him that he is younger than them. He calls them childish and shouts that he is taller than them, then declares that he is the boss because he said it first, making the twins think he is the childish one. While they are busy arguing about who is in charge, Finn just stares at them, realizing that they have a long way to go. A moment later, they decided that Lois was the leader, Finn was the support, and the twins were the burden. He tells them that they have got everything they need, so they should go, which the twins agree to. But then, he notices the clouds become darker and dons his lightning stone, saying, "It's been a while." The twins hug him, excitedly asking if he was getting struck by lightning again and tell him that they wanted to be struck as well. He pushes them away, realizing that they were never told that being struck by lightning is a bad thing. But the twins just hug him back, making him agree and tell them to be sure not to let go of him. Then, they wait for the lightning, and he notices that it looks bigger this time. Then, he raised his hand, proudly shouting that they should see what was coming. When the thunder appeared, they closed their eyes to take it, but nothing happened, making them confused. He asks if the lightning bolt missed and tells them that it has never happened before. But then, he hears a noise from behind, making him look back while asking, "What is that noise?" He was shocked to see an avalanche heading in their direction. He immediately grabs the twins and runs away while dragging them, realizing that it is what they are aiming at. The twins happily looks at the avalanche, but he just calls them the Burden Team and orders them to transform quickly. But when he looks back, he realized that the avalanche was close to them, making him horrified to see it. Finn worriedly called out to him. Cursing in frustration, he quickly used his disconnection spell, which essentially disconnected him from space. The snow hit them, causing them to roll. Dizzy from the ordeal, he struggled to regain his bearings, while the twins enjoyed themselves. They then slammed onto the ground. A moment later, he emerged from under the snow and stood up, saying he thought he was going to die this time. However, the twins told him it was fun and that they should do it again, which infuriated him, and he hit the twins on their heads. Angrily, he told them to grow up and asked where the hell the avalanche had brought them. He noticed that all the roads were covered, so they couldn't see anything. Kanny called out to him, telling him it was like a pool of snow. Then Kon dived into the snow. Excitedly, Kanny stood up, saying she wanted to dive too, and jumped into the snow, piercing through it as well. Frustrated at seeing them, he told them to take it easy and get out because they had a long way to go. However, the twins didn't emerge from the snow, making him angrily kick the snow and ask what kind of prank they were playing. But when his foot touched the snow, he fell in, causing him to shout in shock. Then, he grabbed Finn, who was next to him, and dragged her inside. He ordered her to fly him up, to which she replied that he made it sound like it was easy. Then, they fell into a long hole, shouting in fear. He hit the side while asking when it would stop, but noticed that the hole was long and they were falling rapidly inside of it. Finn warned him to look out while pointing ahead, and he was shocked to see a cliff in front of him. Then, he slid toward the cliff and fell. He told himself to transform in a hurry, but then he was caught by Kon and Kanny, who were in dragon form, holding his feet. They gently set him down and transformed back into human form, excitedly telling him that it was so much fun. He found himself gaining respect for them, and Finn agreed with him. Then, he stood up and asked where they were while looking at the hallway in front of them. Finn observed that it didn't look like a naturally formed cave but more like a man-made corridor. He agreed with her but wondered why it felt familiar to him, despite it definitely being his first time there, and asked himself where he had seen that place before. Finn asked what they should do next, and he replied that they should think about it and move slowly because rushing might take them further away from the exit. However, the twins ran toward the hallway, shouting that they thought the exit was there, and planned to check a different side, which made him angry and he shouted at them to slow down. When he caught up with them and was about to say something, he stopped upon noticing their reaction and asked why they were standing there. Kanny called him over and asked what those things were while pointing ahead. He looked closer, asking her what she meant. Then, he heard something in front of them and saw a bunch of men in knight armor. The man in front opened his mouth and exhaled deeply while glaring at them, shocking him. Then, they backed away in fear as the men walked closer to them. He asks Finn what those men are, and Finn, who is hiding behind him, stutteringly replies that she thinks there are more than one of them. They then see lots of men staring at them while walking closer, but then one of the men stomps its foot down hard, causing a loud noise that makes them jump a little in shock. Then the men growl at them. Kon, confused, asks if those guys are really humans. But Kanny calls her brother a dumbass and tells him that humans don't have red lights in their eyes. He stutteringly asks what those are and if the man in front was the Winter General. He remembers that before the webtoon story began, the heroic King Valencia saved everyone from a world crisis. After Valencia saved everyone, even in the afterlife, Valencia was said to be overworked and noticed that it was the place where that general was said to appear called the Ice Tomb of the Great Hero King, making him wonder if that place really was the Hero King's tomb. He sighed in relief, realizing that the Hero King's tomb was that far away from their home, and thought that it was an unexpected coincidence. But then he wondered if it didn't mean that the item from the webtoon was there too, if that was the Hero King's tomb. Suddenly, Finn calls him while pointing to the front and worriedly asks him if he thinks they look a bit too aggressive. He called Kon and Kanny, who immediately agreed, and then tells them that they should get rid of them. The twins excitedly dash to the front, and Kon jumps toward the men. Kon then lifts his sword and launches it while shouting that he'd go first. The man blocks Kon's sword with his axe, but the axe cracks from Kon's attack, and eventually, Kon slashes the axe together with the man. The man releases a bright light from his body and explodes. Canny shouts that it sucked because she wanted to go first while a man is launching an attack behind her, but she notices it in time and speedily slashes the man with her 2 swords, making the man explode too. He tells Finn, who was watching as if it were a movie, that those twins are not bad. He then notices that the twins aren't just playing around either, their strength is comparable to that of a 2nd-tier samurai, making him feel comfortable with them by his side, especially as the knights retreat in fear. He activates his time power, thinking that he needs to speed things up, and attacks the knights with his temporal law to slow time. The chains from his time power grab the knights' axes, and even though the knights try to take their axes back, they can't move them because the time chain is slowing them down. Khan tells Canny that they are getting slower, and Canny responds that Lois must have enchanted their weapons with a temporal crystal. Khan, proudly raising his sword, tells his sister that if that's the case, they should take this opportunity. The twins then dash toward the knights, shouting that they should finish all of them. The knights are shocked to see this, but Canny just slashes at them while laughing as if she were merely playing. On the other hand, Khan enjoys slashing them and watches as they explode one by one. Khan excitedly shouts that they were exploding and popping like popcorn. The twins then rush at the last one, making the knight cry out in horror. The twins slash the last knight together, causing him to release a bright light and explode. Afterward, the twins see armor and equipment left behind by the knights. Khan, somewhat saddened, asks if it's already over, and Canny says that it was so boring. He just praises them and suggests they try something more fun, making the twins look at him in confusion. Later, Finn poured him tea and he elegantly drank it. He was peacefully sitting, asking, "Isn't this tea delicious?" To which Finn awkwardly thanked him. Then Finn looked behind her and saw the twins busily fighting in the hallway. Khan laughingly shouted that it was so fun, and Canny told him it was exciting. He shouted to Khan that there were arrows coming from the right and ordered him to dodge, which Khan did, slashing the arrows coming to his right. Then he shouted to Canny to watch out for the blade on the left, and Canny replied yes while slashing the blade. Then he warned them that a giant boulder was coming, and the twins easily shattered it into pieces. After that, the twins told him that they were done and there was nothing else moving. Finn couldn't believe that all those traps and generals were gone in one fell swoop and thought that the twins may be young. But dragons are still dragons. He stood up from sitting and told them that it looked like they were pretty much done there. Finn, who was busy putting things back in her inventory, asked him where that place was, and he replied that they were in the Hero King's tomb, making Finn shockingly ask him if they were where Hero King Valencia resides. He proudly replied yes and explained that it was the place where Valencia was buried, a dungeon of sorts, with monsters and traps designed to ward off intruders who want to disturb the king. Once they have overcome all the traps and obstacles and made their way through the many passageways, they'll reach the heart of the tomb where a sweet reward awaits. However, he knew that the tomb was made to be found at the start of the adventure, to give some starting equipment to the party. He also tells Finn that it is a beginner's dungeon and he is pretty sure no one has visited that place yet. In other words, all those treasures will be theirs. While he was busy laughing silently, the twins looked at him, confused. He then praised the twins and told them that they were almost there, so they should be ready, to which the twins replied yes. He then led the way, telling them that they should go. A moment later, they arrived at the end of the cave. They stopped walking and were in awe upon seeing a huge ice cave. Finn tells them it's so big, and the twins tell him there's something up ahead that's big and ugly. He replies that he knows because he's seen it. It's the final boss, the 10 Giants. He notices that it's just like the original story, which means the treasure should be right behind the door in front of them. He calls the twins to instruct them but is shocked to see them both glaring back in anger at the giants. He smiles, thinking they make a great pair, and notices they don't seem to be intimidated at all by the giant enemies. He knows that dragons are destined to rise to the top from the moment they fly, and at that very moment, those young ones are baring their teeth as they look down upon those far below them. He asks the twins if they see what he means. Canny responds that it's hilarious, and Khan tells him he's the best. He releases his power, telling them they should end it, and the twins dash toward the giants while excitedly replying, yes. The giant raises its axe to attack, but the twins slash it first, making the giant growl in pain. Then, he puts his power into the giant and closes his palm, ordering it to burst. The giant begins to crumple its body, then it explodes into pieces. While the twins are arguing about who will kill the rest, he is slowing the giants down, and Finn is watching them in silence from behind. She awkwardly laughs and tells them they are amazing. A moment later, Khan happily says that it was fun, and Canny says she's going to get a good night's sleep, while he laughingly approaches the door, telling them they should check out their reward. They walk closer in front of the huge door, and the twins excitedly tell him to open it. He puts his hands on the door, telling the twins he's opening it, and pushes. They are all stunned to see a swarm of gold and treasures inside the room. Khan rushes into the room, shouting that there's more treasure than in his father's storage room, and dives into the pile of gold, while Canny and Finn are amazed, looking at the gold. Finn looks at him and tells him to look at the gold, but he just walks straight ahead, making Finn confused. Then he stops and sees the Hero King Valencia inside a block of ice. Finn asks him if the man inside the ice is Hero King Valencia. Touching the ice, she remarks that so many years have passed, yet King Valencia is still alive. He then notices something at the bottom and stares at the letters on the ice. He asks if it's an ancient winter language and recalls that from the origin, creatures of light and darkness were born. They were designed as good and evil, and as the remaining light and darkness intertwined, chaos ensued. In the midst of that turmoil, a distinct boundary emerged, separating good from evil. The earth was created, and earthly beings were born from both sources. The good and the evil creations, who called themselves exalted beings, were unaware of the world below. They only dreamed of dominating each other, and the conflict between good and evil caused all other beings on Earth to suffer. Eventually, those on Earth who couldn't bear it drew their swords against the good and the evil. The dragons led the way, followed by the humans and the half-breeds. After a long struggle, the victorious earthly beings scattered to the continents of the four seasons. Over time, they forgot about good and evil, and they forgot about the dragons who took up the task of vigilance. But Hero King Valencia warned everyone that the dragons who sacrificed themselves for peace would return to the world once again, as would those good and evil beings. As the last generation to hear about that war, King Valencia left it to them and asked them to pass down the story. He wonders if there was such a thing in the original universe. He then angrily calls Valencia a bastard for leaving that daunting task to them. But he knows that it isn't important right now because he has found the Book of Lawlessness of Hero King Valencia. Valencia, an unorthodox genius who reached the zero tier in the human body, wrote a theoretical book containing the sum total of everything he accomplished in his life. It's no exaggeration to say that the original protagonist, swordsman Kendrick, became the strongest in the human world. But he knows that compared to that book, all the other treasures are insignificant. He then looks at the gold and thinks it would be a shame to leave it behind, so he decides that they should take some. He got closer to the gold and was busy grabbing some when the block of ice containing Valencia cracked. He looked back at the sound and was shocked to see the crack spread until the ice shattered into pieces. Stuttering, he said, "This is ridiculous." Valencia then pierced his huge sword into the ground and slowly moved, making him wonder if the Hero King Valencia was awake. Valencia opened his eyes, causing him to step back in panic, realizing this wasn't part of the original story. Valencia then raised a finger and pointed at him, stating, "That is not his property." The twins fearfully asked him what the hell that was, and he replied, "That's Valencia, the Hero King." Canny, in disbelief, asked if it really was the Hero King. He confirmed it and explained that Valencia was a Tier 0 warrior, so they couldn't deal with him now. He was about to suggest to the twins that they should transform into dragons, but then the ground shook as they saw Valencia raise his sword, proclaiming that for those who are greedy, only death awaits. Then Valencia releases a power from his sword. Panicked and unable to move his legs in fear, he wondered if this was the effect of a Tier 0. He looked back at the twins, shaking in fear as well. Clenching his teeth in anger, he released his power, questioning if all his training was just to die like this. He then gathered his 4 attributes in his palm and raised his fist. Valencia swung down his sword toward him, and he met Valencia's power with his own, shouting his desire to live. He was glad that his attack reached Valencia, but Valencia's power continued directly at him and struck him, breaking the floor in the process. The force of the attack caused Finn to roll around, and when the attack subsides, Finn regained her senses, shocked to see the ground in half. Horrified, she reached out her hand and worriedly calls Lois, who was hit by the attack. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 3 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.